Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and start this webinar. We got a 2-hour block scheduled. Sioux Falls, hopefully you get your screens connected. I did see a message that a number of people had laptops in there to share and look off of, and also you could probably call in by phone too. So this is being recorded, and the presentation can be downloaded on our internet site, and the handouts will be there, and the recording will be there, usually either later today or if not by tomorrow. The Skype for Business does work a little easier for recording and reposting sessions, so that's kind of my preference to cover that, to use this form of presentation. Also, I do recommend that unless you have a headset, that you are doing the phone line for the audio. Otherwise, the laptop, if you have your speaker and microphone close together, we start getting this echoing that happens. So I recommend that you just use the phone number to call in, and you can mute it on your phone line, or also you can do the *6 to mute and also the #6 to unmute it. During this presentation, I'm just going to kind of cover the 3 main areas, and I think Eric's online too, and maybe Gay and Rhonda, they may want to add some comments as we go through this presentation. But the 3 areas are competitive integrated employment. I'm going to cover a review of Section 511, which is a sub-minimum wage, and also pre-employment transition services. We recently set out our final policy on a competitive integrated employment, and we wanted to take this opportunity to follow up to see what kind of questions people may be having on this new policy, and if there are some questions they have on the other 2 topics. A couple things I do want to mention before we get too far into this. Workforce Investment Act is considered as Title IV. The Rehabilitation Act is considered Title IV. So the Rehab Act that's been in place is basically plugged into the full WIOA Title IV section. So sometimes your labor partner may refer to us as Title IV versus Voc Rehab. This was signed into law July 22nd, 2014. Some portions of the law had various implementation dates. Of course, Section 511 was fully implemented 2 years later. And then what happened in June 30th of 2016, the final regulations of rules came out for the VR program, and there's kind of a draft, but then they're finally available August 19th, and then there was a grace period with effective date of October 18th into there. So really the regulations for the WIOA came out almost 2 years afterwards, and because of those regulations, sometimes they provided much more detail, much more in-depth description and policy of the requirements, and that is what started some of the changes with the competitive integrated employment, and then we had a few changes with Section 511 resulting of it. So okay, if I can figure out how to run my presentation here. Okay, I'm going to kind of run through the PowerPoint presentation that we have. The employment outcome, the changes prior to the regulations. Couple changes that came about it was added specific reference to customized employment, and it says as a form of competitive integrated employment. And I think there's a lot of confusion there as versus a form, or is customized employment a means to get competitive integrated employment. And I consider customized employment is when a full package of services is provided for an individual, to including assessing that person's interest, the person-centered planning that happens, It is situational assessments that may be happening into there, and it may be job carving. So it's much more comprehensive, kind of almost a service in some ways that leads to competitive integrated employment. Also, one of the changes that came out and probably impacted the service of blind and visually impaired more was the homemaker and unpaid family workers were removed as employment outcomes. Division of Rehab Services typically didn't have these as employment outcomes in the past, but sometimes Service of Blind may have had some. Some states, the blind agency is a very high percent of people in those categories. When I just looked at the law before we started this presentation, and the Department Secretary of Education can determine which employment outcomes meet the requirements. And back in 2001 is when they removed the sheltered workshop employment as an outcome. And now we're just seeing that homemaker and unpaid family workers now also being removed from the list. Also, if you do have questions during this, feel free to ask them. Again, chatting works the best. I can have the screen. I can see if someone does have a chat or message that way. So the employment outcome, and one of the things that comes up is, well, people don't have informed choice. And you're also seeing this with the sub-minimum wage situation. And people do have an informed choice, but what it's meaning is that voc rehab can't be paying for these types of employment outcomes. So individuals who are participating in the VR program, it needs to meet the competitive and integrated employment for our outcome if we're going to fund those services. They can choose to stay in shelter workshop. They can choose to be in group models, but those are not situations that we're going to fund anymore. Okay, hold on here. Okay, availability of homemaker. We just kind of talked about that a few minutes ago. I kind of want to get into the program guide that was sent out, and it was issued January 23rd, 2017. One of the things also we're doing is when you bring up the VR faces and program guides, we had some documents that were the Word version and some were into a PDF, and we're trying to move all those into there that are in a PDF format that includes the signature of the directors. That way, if someone does ask for a copy of it, you can give them a copy of our signed version. Otherwise, when it's a Word version, things can be edited onto there. So the program guide is a little different on the competitive integrated employment. It's a little different than what we've normally done on program guides. We knew that there would be some discussion at the state level by some of our providers. What is meeting these requirements? And so it does pull in addition to the regulations or citing it, it does pull in sections of the preamble. And the preamble of the regulations is more or less the department's discussion. I would say sometimes there's more information in the preamble than there is in the specific regulations itself. It'll talk about the comments received, but then it'll talk about its interpretation. And they have defined the preamble as the U.S. Department of Education's policy or interpretation of the administrative rules. And so this is where a lot of this information we've also brought into the program guide. We also underline key words because key words are in addition to some definitions into there. So and it's important that agencies out there and the individuals we serve understand that we are just mirroring the federal the regulations on competitive integrated employment. We're not making this up as we go. And probably the one biggest type of agencies that are struggling the most on the regulation changes was probably the Ability One contractors, and I refer to them, those are the ones that have the federal contracts. The largest one is in Rapid City, Ellsworth Air Base with Black Hills Works. Some of the smaller agencies, Huron has federal contract, Oahe Inc. has a federal contract, and Aberdeen does. I'm not sure, there's probably some other communities out there, but probably a year or two ago, there was some national publicity on these federal contracts, Ability One, and some questionable contract processes that were happening to there. But it's specifically called out in the preamble about the Ability One contractors, and we'll go through that a little bit more in a few minutes. So, also, we did come up with a form that is to be used by the VR counselors to evaluate if a person's job meets the competitive integrated employment. I know there's providers out there that are asking, does this job site meet the requirement? And we can't really just say, yes, this job site does and this job site doesn't. It's this person's job site, what they're doing and who is the employer is what we need to take in consideration. Okay. The components of competitive integrated employment, it has three areas that must be satisfied to meet this requirement. Is it competitive earnings? Is it integrated location? And is there opportunities for advancement? And I'll get into these more detail into there, but an individual's employment must satisfy all three of these requirements into there. Now, I know we'll get into some areas like opportunities for advancement. There are just some jobs at small businesses that there's not a lot of opportunities for advancement. So it's an equal opportunity advancement. So I think we just need to be understanding of that and to use that form in evaluating a person's job. So I'm going to take these three categories and take them one at a time. So first of all, the competitive earnings. It must be at least minimum wage. It must be comparable to the customary rate paid to other employees without disabilities, and be able with comparable skills and experience. And the employee with disability must also be able to receive the same benefits similar to those without disabilities. And I'll give you an example of the Ability One contracts, how they would not fit into this. If those federal contracts have a prevailing wage rate of $14 an hour, so even if a person's working 70% of that, they're probably above minimum wage, but they're not at the same wage rate that a person without a disability. And so if a person without a disability is working at the airbase, they couldn't just pay that person 70% of the wage rate. They'd have to pay them to $14 an hour. And so it needs to be looked at that arrangement that's happening, that payment. So this does rule out those federal contracts. They may be above minimum wage, but they're not going to meet the competitive integrated employment. And we probably had cases in the past where we did close individuals in that employment situation. Now, self-employment is a little different. There's no changes onto that. We're going to see at times when you start looking at the hours a person puts in for self-employment, it's going to look like they're below the minimum wage, but they're still going to meet the requirements of this competitive integrated employment. Now, I have heard of some of the community support providers talking about they're going to develop these micro businesses and they're going to run it, and it's going to be the individual's micro business. That truly isn't self-employment I would consider into there. And so if you get into those kind of situations, just give me a call on that. We'll talk through that and evaluate the situation onto there. Location. Location is what they say. Um, is typically found in the community, and it's a setting where the individual interacts with others performing the same type of job. Now, we did put also into here that there needs to be the majority of the workers have to be without disabilities. So it doesn't mean you can't have two individuals at the same time working. And I'll give you an example. I was in Winter the other day, and they were talking about this being a mobile crew or enclave. They took two people down to Pizza Hut, and the two individuals were doing various jobs, but there's four other workers there. And I would consider that as, the location of meeting that integration. I think they were just getting caught up on the fact that this person needs one-to-one, and all the time, and some individuals will. So, I mentioned this earlier that agencies are asking us, is this job site integrated or not? And some positions in that job site might be, some may not. So that's where we're going to have to use that evaluation tool to really determine if this person is in an integrated setting. Let me back up one thing too. There's the definitions that were in there, the work unit, and typically found in the community unit work unit. I gotta get the right one here. One of the things how they describe the work unit is in the competitive integrated employment is I don't want us not to allow a competitive integrated job for a community support provider who is hiring the person as a staff person. And they may be working with people with disabilities, and it can be competitive integrated employment. You even look at our own agency, and we have a significant number of people we hire with disabilities. That doesn't mean that we're not going to meet the requirement of competitive integrated employment. We will in that portion of it. They're going to take a look at the work unit. Are they considered as clients or are they considered as staff? That's where they're going to get into the work unit definition. We must consider the level of interactions individuals have with disabilities, with employees without disabilities on the evaluation form. That we do have that as one of the requirements onto there. Definitely the group and enclave settings, which we typically had in the past, will not satisfy the integrated location employment. But keep in mind is what agencies are calling that group or enclave settings is they're thinking that if there's one-on-one staff person, to them they may think it's a group. And I'm thinking going back to that Pizza Hut example where they had two individuals with disabilities working, and there was one staff person there, and Pizza Hut was paying them directly. And the individuals just needed that level of supervision at that point in time. Eventually, they may be able to fade back more. And I do think sometimes that agencies need to look at ways of fading back and let an employer take more of that role of that supervision. But I think sometimes that is just a a lack of training and understanding sometimes by the employment specialists of thinking that they have to provide all the services all the time versus letting those natural supports occur. This is again an example when entities are set up specifically for the purpose of providing employment to people with disabilities. And this is, I'm going to use the ones that have the Ability One contracts, that they have to employ people with disabilities on their Ability One contracts. That's their specific purpose. And that's what it's saying in the preamble, that they would not meet that requirements of integrated location and a competitive employment. But it doesn't mean they can't hire that individual disability as a staff person into there who has a disability. Because as a staffing, that is not their primary purpose. It may be one of their goals to have a high percent of individuals with disabilities, but that's not their primary purpose. A question came up recently, and I'm trying to think which office it was, but I think it was probably Yankton, that we're seeing a hiring freeze out there in some of the federal programs. So these federal funded agencies cannot hire the individuals directly, but they can go through temporary employment agencies. And I've seen a couple situations where the individual is working at a site that is definitely integrated. They are probably the only one with a disability working in that group, but the payroll is being run through Ability Building Services or Hawaii Inc. And because they needed that temporary employment agency function onto there. And I think those are some possibilities where it still could be considered integrated competitive employment. It's just that agency had a hiring freeze. They couldn't hire the people on that payroll directly. Advancement component, in real small businesses, this is really hard to determine that there's any advancement period. Because there may be only 2 or 3 other employees. But I think sometimes in the larger settings, you almost have to look at sometimes, and our evaluation form will help identify, how is this person considered? Are they considered a client, or are they considered as a staff? And if they're considered, a client and they're not invited to the staff events, the gatherings, the staff meetings, they're probably not at that same level of opportunity for advancement because they're not being treated equally onto there. Okay, kind of going to go through the form, and it's intended that the VR counselors will complete this form, and it's intended that you only need to complete this on individuals that the job site is in question. If you have a person who's hired directly by Pizza Hut or Burger King or whatever, you don't need to do this unless you think there is some questionable on is this competitive integrated employment or not. So first of all, the top part is just some basic information of collecting. And this form, keep in mind, will be saved in the client file to help make this determination. What is the wage rate paid to the client? Of course, that needs to be above minimum wage. Is this employment through Ability One contract, the federal contracts? What is the wage rate paid to other employees without disabilities with comparable skills and experience and training? And the number of employees without disabilities, not counting the job coach, and a number of employees with disabilities, including this employee. This is information that is going to help you determine whether this is going to meet that requirement of competitive integrated employment or not. Describe the interaction with coworkers without disabilities or those with disabilities. Those are more of inclusion kind of situations. How well is the individual included in the agency? I've seen where there's been people with disabilities been employed and then they're almost segregated at that business, and what level of interaction is really truly happening with other coworkers without disabilities. Are they having breaks at the same time? Are they involved in the Christmas parties? And I'm trying to think, probably a good example was years ago we had a contract that was happening with Citibank, and of course it was like as a temporary agency and as an enclave, but eventually they hired one of the individuals specifically for a job who does running mail throughout the whole building, and this individual was considered as a staff, had interaction with other coworkers, invited to the Christmas parties that Citibank had, and was fully inclusive into that business. Other factors consider of inclusion. It doesn't mean if it's not that, if there's a no, that it doesn't meet competitive integrated employment, but sometimes it's a consideration onto there. You know, was the job opening posted to the general public? Or was this the type of job that was posted? Sometimes the employer wants to hire a person with disability and reached out to them directly, or it could have been a job carving situation. Did the individual submit an application for the job? Was the individual interviewed for the position? Is there a job description for the position? Who's the payroll from? And again, what you're seeing here is a lot of times when there is a provider involved, the water gets a little muddy. Is this a really competitive integrated employment, or is this what a provider would like to be called competitive integrated employment to get the reimbursements from us? So, and these may run a little bit more with the federal contracts or agencies that do a lot of different types of contracts out there. And I'm going to again use Rapid City. I know they have like a Mount Rushmore arrangements. Who's being paid? Who's the person paid by? Did the person interview for that position? You know, was that position? I mean, those are considerations into there. It's meeting competitive integrated employment or not. Also, who's setting the schedule? Who's considered their boss or supervisor? These are all factors of inclusion that really could help in that final determination. And then when you get to the very end, the VR counselor's termination, the first three are going through those three requirements. Does this meet the requirements of competitive earnings? Does this meet the requirements of integrated employment location? And does this meet the requirements for that opportunity for advancement? And of course, that fourth one if all three are yes, then it's going to be is determined that its employment meets requirements of competitive integrated employment. So at this time, I guess I want to see what questions people may have out there on the competitive integrated employment before I go on to the next section. Questions, anyone? I know we've had this kind of in discussion since the Rehabilitation Act was reauthorized. The regulations, however, gave it much more in-depth clarity and specifically singled out the federal contracts in the regulations that wasn't like that in the Act. And there's still some ongoing discussion at the federal level. Of course, our federal agencies are basically saying, well, every case has to be determined on an individual situation, but then under regulations, they were very clear that if you're on a Ability One contract, is not meeting that requirement.
Bernie, this is Eric. There's just a couple things I wanted to emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think, and we've talked about this a little bit, this is our responsibility to do this, to determine competitive integrated employment. So it's the counselor filling out the form, basically making that determination, correct?
Yes, it is. And
Okay.
so,
and then
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I know that providers are going to interpret this as their site as competitive integrated employment, but the counselor needs to evaluate that person's job specifically.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to note on the form, some of those factors to consider, and that was back a slide on your presentation there. I don't think there's any one single factor there that would make a counselor determine yes, this is competitive integrated employment, or no, it isn't. I mean, these are factors to consider, but they don't make the decision all by itself.
Now, and these are more of inclusion, how that person with disability is viewed in the workplace, and it gets sometimes foggy, you should say, when that provider is kind of involved into there, and it still can be competitive integrated employment, but some of these individuals are going to need more ongoing job coaching supports, and there may be unique situations, but I think providers need to work towards that. I'm getting some questions popping up here, Eric. Do you want me to read them?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Someone asked, Katie has a question to the DDN. Okay. Jan is asking, what time in the process would the counselor evaluate the position? What's going to happen is you do a job placement package probably, and I would say before you process that payment or you get too far into that, if you think there's any doubt about it, is it meet that requirement or not? I know Jan asked this question, that there was an employment arrangement in Pier with Oahe Inc., for example, on these vending machines. I think this form probably could have been done right at the very beginning when we became aware of that job placement arrangement. Otherwise, really by rights, we can't pay for the job placement, we can't pay for the job coaching if it's not meeting the competitive integrated employment. So I would say as soon as you become aware of the employment and there is some questions about it, and the ones we're going to run into is when the provider has a contractual arrangement happening. Those are the ones that are going to be most likely in question. I mean, if we do a job placement and they place a person at Burger King, Oahe Inc. has no contract with them whatsoever. They're working for us to do job coaching. I don't think you need to do the form. Burger King is paying for the wages. Burger King is setting the schedule. All that is happening. But motels is a different situation where it may get a little muddy sometimes. Where is the motel paying the community support provider, or is the motel paying these people directly? And who is setting these people's schedule? I mean, I went out and did some reviews of some people in a motel, and here was a job coach, and they were overseeing 3 different employees, 3 individuals' disabilities at one time, and I did not see where those individuals had interaction with any other housekeeper. And the motel was not scheduling with the provider for the schedule, they are to the individuals, they were doing it with the provider. And so those situations I would have considered would not have been competitive integrated employment based upon an arrangement. There's also a question here. It says, this still should be communicated to providers what is going to be questioned, right? And yeah, you can share this form with them, but they're not going to fill out this form. You know, this is your interpretation, your evaluation. You can share with the provider what we are looking for. And when we do provider training, we do these training webinars in March. Competitive integrated employment is going to be one of those questions onto there. David Woodruff had a question. He had a few clients interested in working from home through J-Lodge, for example, and we are no longer able to assist with some. Yeah, we can. J-Lodge is working at home. J-Lodge is the employer. Yeah, they're working at their home. If you were a person without a disability, you'd be working at home. Yeah, there's probably, you get as much interaction as anyone with or without disabilities. I would not exclude that kind of a situation. Did that answer your question, David? Nod your head. Okay. My screen went up and down when you did that.
Bernie, this is Katie.
Yeah, Katie.
So I have a question when there's job carving involved. So what happened was one of my clients got hired by Lifescape to work in the kitchen. She couldn't keep up, and it was posted to the public, and she got the job. But she couldn't do all of the duties, so they brought in a second person with a disability to assist her.
This is at Lifescape?
So there's two people doing the job of, yes, this is at Lifescape.
Okay.
So technically one employee should be doing the job, but they've hired two people with disabilities to do the job. This one gets
really, where you got to go through the whole form and everything. Person paid minimum wage?
Yeah, actually they're making a little more than minimum wage, yes.
Who is the co-workers situation?
There is about 8 to 10 folks without disabilities in the kitchen. Because I went and I did this evaluation.
Okay.
But I know the employment specialist at Lifescape wanted me to ask about like those job carving situations, since sometimes those aren't posted to the general public because the employment specialist will go in and see a need.
Yeah, and this only is a factor helping you determine.
And they're the only two people in the.
It could meet that
requirement. Those are the only two people in the kitchen with disabilities.
Yeah, it could be meeting the requirements of competitive integrated employment. The same thing as if they hire a receptionist who is a person with a disability, and that person is considered, viewed as a staff. Sometimes, one of the better indicators is, is this person included in your staff meetings? How are they viewed within that organization as a staff or client? Maybe one way to help. But, I could see where this could meet the competitive integrated employment. Just the same thing as they may hire a residential staff person with a disability, or someone on their floor with a person with disability. We want to encourage them to hire people with disabilities, but are they under the staff payroll? Are they, all those things need to be looked at onto the Katie, but it could be where this meets that requirement. A couple other questions here.
Okay,
What about minimum wage rates? Do they have to go by the federal or state? Whichever one's higher. Which is state. If they were to hire a person without a disability, how would that person be paid on that job? So example of Katie's example in that kitchen situation is they must have a pay scale on what this is paid, and let's say it typically was 30 hours. The person couldn't do all the functions of it, so they split it to one person's doing 15, the other one doing 15, and if they were paid on that same pay scale as people without disabilities is what would meet that first requirement of wages. I'm reading another question. All the factors for competitive integrated employment should be considered when doing a situational assessment in place that could result in employment. There's a question mark. I'm not sure what the question is. And Rhonda has a comment. She lost audio on a webinar. You guys hear me okay yet?
Yeah, you're coming in fine here.
So it's just a Rhonda.
She just said she lost her audio connection over the phone. So
okay. So Egle, I'm trying to understand your question there. All the factors of competitive employment, integrated employment should be considered when doing a situational assessment that could lead to employment. You could do a situational assessment in an environment that may not be quite as integrated, and sometimes situational assessments are not paid. So I don't think I would hold all three of those requirements in place with the situational assessment. Let's say you do a situational at a motel cleaning, and the community support provider has 2 or 3 other people there as part of their enclave. It has some supervision. They're doing the rooms by themselves. But to be the result in the end employment, it would have to meet the requirements. I hope I didn't confuse you on that, Egle. It'd be nice to have the situational assessment as integrated as possible, but for some situations, it may not be. Okay, Yankton's add to that. Okay, taking that a step further, that must be Jen talking. Taking a step further, what about before doing an ESP of project skills? Well, we said project skills should not be at the school, or should, there could be times where an employment skills situation could be for like a staff position at a residential, at a community support provider. It should follow as close as possible competitive integrated employment, especially since we're paying the wages. But I'm just going to use an example back at the air base again. I don't know if we're doing situational assessments out there. The thing is, if they do get a permanent job, we're not going to be able to count it as competitive integrated employment for us. I think if all possible, we should try to pursue that the project skills and employment skills, and if all possible, situational assessments are meeting those requirements, but I don't know if I'd say 100% they always have to be. Okay, my screen quit beeping for a while. Oh, there it went again. That's Yankton. Okay. Ron Lynch. We do have a co-op employee asked to do project skills and a crew since we would pay above minimum wage. I said no. Yeah, crew situations are a little different. Yeah. And I think we said in the agreements that it can't be part of enclaves, but I don't want to exclude where we may do a work experience for a receptionist at a community support provider or something like that. Okay? So just because they're a community support provider, I don't want to exclude them completely. Okay. We'll answer more questions when we get to the end here. I'm going to move on to pre-employment transition services. We do refer to it as the Pre-ETS. And I did send out a document specifically onto this, and I want to thank the transition staff for putting that together. It's kind of referred to as a Pre-ETS Plus, and they gave some definitions, examples on each of these 5 categories. And also, we had a meeting this morning with Mitchell and Jennifer and I think Gay and Ron were there. And we're going to have to also start documenting these 5 pre-employment transition services on the services like our closure page. But it's going to be moved to a quarterly situation. Plus, we're going to start doing some documentation on individuals who haven't even applied for services that can receive pre-employment transition services. So, first of all, you get into the job exploration counseling. This could be things that the school is doing. It doesn't always have to be what VR is paying for. And that's probably one of the most confusing areas of the pre-employment transition services. It says that VR has to make it available statewide to all the individuals. But of course, if we don't know about the individuals, how do we do that? And it doesn't say that we always have to pay for it all either. And there's a certain level of responsibilities the schools have to do. And I would say when the Individuals Education Act gets reauthorized, you're going to see some new definitions in there with these 5 categories of services, and they're going to have a shared responsibility into there. But the job exploration counseling can include job shadowing, utilizing the South Dakota My Life, situational assessments, employers talking to the students. There's just a number of these activities that the transition project listed onto there, and I just want to make sure that I bring them all into. So that document I did send out does give examples of these areas. The work-based learning experience, project skills is probably going to be the most prominent one into there. That if they become a VR client, they get project skills, they're meeting that requirement of work-based learning experience. But there can be other ways too, and some of these are repeated from the job exploration counseling. It could be the job shadowing, it could be the situational assessments. But the key is it has to be provided in an integrated environment and community to the maximum extent possible. I am seeing some of these community support providers that are developing little mini areas in their day program, and they're calling it pre-employment transition services. But what it is simulated stock shelving, simulated making a motel bed, simulated grocery store stock shelving, or simulated, it's simulated work. It's not an integrated environment. Next door is where they're doing the widgets in the production area. Their break room, they're probably sharing the same times with people doing the sub-minimum wage. And that's not going to meet the requirement of the pre-employment transition services. And the pre-employment transition services is used in a couple of different places. One is, we have to make sure it's available across the state. Secondly, before an individual who's no longer a student can start doing sub-minimum wage, they have to do pre-employment transition services. And if it was all based on simulated work in their day program, it's not going to meet that requirement. And that means the individual is not going to be able to start the sub-minimum wage employment. Counseling opportunities for enrollment in comprehensive post-secondary education programs. I know this is a challenge when someone has a very significant intellectual disability, but you always could be talking to them about Augie Access. You could be talking to them about Aberdeen starting their 18 to 21 program. You could have that discussion with them, but this may not be always possible for some individuals into their. But you can also, there's some other options. You can do some tours Project Search may fit into example of somewhere into there. Sometimes they have college days events, catch the wave events. Those are all possibilities that information was provided to them. Workplace readiness, developing social skills and independent living skills. This is on the soft skills training. Some of the schools have some of these classes already happening. And then the last one is instruction on self-advocacy, which may include peer mentoring. That one's probably the most hardest to identify. I feel it's the hardest to identify. Even if a person becomes a VR client, I think you can easily identify those first 4 areas happened, but it's really hard to identify that 5th one into there. And so that's why you're seeing when we do these summer initiatives that the ones that we picked onto there was that they need to provide workplace readiness training, develop social skills, independent skills, and instruction on self-advocacy. And we also talked to them about providing them resources of information about agencies and services in the community. So, and I think sometimes the question asked is how much of these pre-employment transition services has to happen. There's really no definition on that. There just has to be some that's happened. They don't all need to go through project skills, but there could be situational assessments that could meet the requirement of the work-based learning. So it's just that you can document, the school can document that these areas of the 5 pre-employment transition services were provided. Yankton has a question, how detailed does this form have to be? Dates? Do the schools have to include the curriculum they use for self-advocacy? I think we're probably talking about the form on documenting this. Let me see if that's in my discussion a little bit later here. No, it's not. We did come up with a form, and it's out, of course, in your form directory. And it basically follows these 5 categories of defining what was provided for these areas. And if you have dates, great. If you don't, like the instruction and self-advocacy, it could be the school had a class. They went to the YLF in June of 2017. You could say that they, for the counseling on comprehensive, for the post-secondary, that they tended to catch the wave, but it needs to be documented in these 5 areas. And it doesn't have to wait until they're 21 on June 30th. You can provide this at any time, but it is kind of a joint form to fill out, the school and the VR. And that documentation is used if they are going on to sub-minimum wage after they are done with secondary school. That's the only time you would need to deal with that form. Did I answer your question, Yankton? Where is Pre-ETS used in VR? Yankton had a question. Schools are asking if they can attach the activities form that they say they're already documenting on it. Yeah, they probably could. One of the things I haven't gotten into detail in our state is there is a whole reporting process that's defined in the regulations. And when the school provides the pre-employment transition services and we document back and let the family know about it, almost all the individuals we're working with for pre-employment transition services are VR clients. And so it's not as a big of an issue there for us. There are states that we're not serving a lot of students with disabilities in the past, and they have to meet this 15% requirement. And what happens is 15% of our VR award has to be used for pre-employment transition services. So in South Dakota, this is 1.5 million. Now we're a small state. You start getting California and New York, we're talking a lot of millions, 30, 40 million dollars has to be used for pre-employment transition services. And this can be used for students with disabilities prior to being a VR applicant. And this is the only situation of VR funds that can be used for non-VR clients. And then some states who are in order selection where they can't serve everyone, they are developing a significant caseload of students and serving them. And literally one state moved a third of its counselors to pre-employment transition counselors. And so that's how they're meeting their requirement. So we're serving these individuals when they are VR clients, not in order selection. I talked about a couple of these things already about that DHS VR 359 form needs to be completed by both of us, all 5 categories. A student or guardian can refuse pre-employment transition services. That's the second part of that one form. It's like 361. However, they cannot begin sub-minimum wage employment then until the age of 25. Just refusing the pre-employment transition services is not a waiver for them. They cannot begin sub-minimum wage employment without the documentation of pre-employment transition services. So. Also, there are individuals that are being served by community support providers that are just not even capable of doing sub-minimum wage employment. And if they don't do sub-minimum wage employment, they don't need this documentation either. It's only for the sub-minimum wage, but we should at least attempt to provide this and offer this for those individuals. Yankton has another question. I've already asked this question. Schools are asking if they can attach activities they do that they already document. I recommend that we do complete that form. You can attach that document and put it in a case file, but I think there needs to be a summary of that form because that form is what gets signed off on, not the attachments. I think the last question on here, maybe I kind of addressed it already, is how much of the Pre-ETS needs to be provided? Some. About the best answer. Like I said, the transition project put together all those examples into there. Doesn't mean that all those have to be provided. There has to be where you can document some of those activities have to be provided into there. Questions on Pre-ETS? Okay, I'll move on. Section 511. Okay. Somebody need to have a question. So not all the PET categories have to be done before youth can receive some. Yes, all 5 categories have to be done. But the example document that was sent out lists like under job counseling, it has like a dozen different examples. Not all of those examples need to be done. But all 5 categories, which is job exploration counseling, you got to document something there. You got to document something under work-based learning. You have to document something under counseling opportunities for post-secondary. You have to document workplace readiness training. And you have to document instructions on self-advocacy. We don't see the PowerPoint under the provider resources. You'll find this PowerPoint under the other link I sent on. Are we still connected? Yes. Did you guys lose connection? I'm going to continue on here. The PowerPoint is going to be on, really it's not the intranet site, but the link I just sent out in the first handout. And if you didn't have the, email me afterwards. I will send it to you. Talk about Section 511. And the part I always struggle with Section 511.
Easton, is there still sound
Yeah.
for the presentation? Because since the PowerPoint changed, we haven't heard anything.
Yeah, but you hear me now? Okay, hold on here. Jennifer, can you hear me? I'm just asking the sites if you can still hear me.
I can hear you.
Say again? Okay. Rhonda Lynch said yes. Okay, other ones are saying yes, they can still hear me. I'm going to continue on. And if someone's having some technical difficulty out there, again, this is being recorded, and I guess you can pick this up afterwards. But
Bernie, this is Laura. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we lost you on our DDN audio, but I've got you on my computer, so I imagine that's maybe what Jennifer's talking about.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm just saying, call the phone number. The webinar, the links webinar software seems to work pretty good. Our problem seems to be when it goes through the DDN, we're losing our connection through there. So I'm going to continue on. We got a little less than an hour, and see if there's some questions there. So anyway, I keep wondering sometimes, why is something so simple but it's still so hard to understand? And there's been so much confusion out there on Section 511, and people overreacting to it, and people not understanding it. And basically, there are 3 guiding rules for Section 511. And one is students with disabilities cannot work sub-minimum wage. These are high school students, or these
Sioux Falls does not have volume either. Is there no volume?
That is just a DDN. Can you call into the number in your conference number? Let's just say here. Give a second for people to call in here. Mitchell, do you know what's going on down there that people lost volume? 2459
I don't know.
Can you? I hear someone. Is that you, Mitchell?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Okay. Could you check with them? Maybe their phone line that calls in is what had the problem.
Sure.
I'm telling the other sites just to, if they have a phone in the conference room, to dial the phone number. Give them a second to do that. I thought I had the phone number handy. I don't. Well, let me continue on. There's 3 basic guiding rules for Section 511. One is students with disabilities cannot work at sub-minimum wage. There is no waiver. There's no nothing on it. And a student is someone who is connected with a secondary school system. If the school is still involved with this individual, and it is someone who has intellectual disabilities and will most likely be on 8 CBS long-term funding, then they will be the school's responsibility until 21 years old as of July 1st. So if they turn 21 on July 15th, they still have a whole nother year to be eligible for the school funding, and they're still considered a student. And I had some agencies, I've sent this out multiple times to the community support providers and the schools, and there's still been some situations that they just simply claimed they didn't know or just didn't want to know. The other one is youth with disabilities. They cannot begin sub-minimum wage employment until certain requirements are met. And take note the word begin. Now, there were some individuals that were already working sub-minimum wage, and they could continue on. Third one is people with disabilities who are not students, who are not youth. They will have to have periodic reviews done. Those are the three guiding principles of Section 511. I'll get into these a little bit more in detail here. Okay, first of all, it's important to understand the difference between, okay, Yankton came up with a question. How much of the pre-ETS has to be done before youth can earn sub-minimum wage? You know, some. That's my answer, Jennifer. That you have to be able to document in those 5 categories. But do they have to have situational assessment and project skills? No. I mean, if you can document in each of those 5 categories, that is what's necessary. So it's important to understand the difference between youth and students. Youth with disabilities is someone who is not younger than 14 and is not older than 24. And that means not older than 24, they're under 25. So if this person is 24 years old and 11 months, they still are youth. And a student is a subset of that, they are typically involved with that secondary school system. And they are that 16 years on up and they're involved with the school system, but you see the youth may be at a higher age. Yankton had another question here. So if each of the categories has an activity is enough, yes, you can say that, but I would make sure if you're the VR counselor that you're doing fairness to the individual to make sure that they're getting informed choice. And one thing to remember with pre-employment transition services and Section 511, the overall intent was to make sure that individuals with disabilities have the opportunity and they have the informed decision of community integrated employment. There is a number of individuals I've seen that schools have just been making referrals to the shelter workshops, and the individual likes it. He likes their friends there, but they never had that opportunity to work with outside in the community. And once they're in a shelter workshop, it's harder to offer that choice. So the intent was to give individuals that choice and opportunities right at the beginning versus shelter workshop being the only choice. Back to students with disabilities, can't work sub-minimum wage. This was effective July 22nd, 2016. And I know we had like a person in Yankton where the school was paying directly to be in a shelter workshop during the day program. And they were probably 18, 19 years old, and they're going to be eligible for school funding until they're 21. They had to discontinue that sub-minimum wage employment on July 22nd, 2016. I've heard some of the agencies say, well, what about grandfathering? There is no grandfathering for students with disabilities. Now, one thing I'll point out, integration has nothing to do with this. This is all sub-minimum wage employment. They can work in a sheltered employment, but they're going to have to pay a minimum wage. And there is an agency that is doing that with one individual. And if that's what the family wants, an individual, that's fine. And I know that situation also the person had or is having an opportunity to try community integrated employment. So also seeing a situation where a community support provider all of a sudden realized that they weren't supposed to be paying, or the student was supposed to be being paid less than minimum wage, decided that, okay, now we'll just have you work for free instead of paying you less than minimum wage. Well, that's not a legal option either into there. You know, if they're paying people to do a work, and they're going to have this person do the same work right next to them, they legally can't do that. So, and I already mentioned that some of the community support providers are setting up some in-house trainings. Some of those are okay. Some of them are really not. I would say if they all become VR clients, then you're going to meet most at pre-employment transition services. Yankton had another question: is VR can't support sheltered employment for minimum wage? That's correct, but it doesn't mean that while this person's a student with disability and we may have doing some project skills, that part of their time they are going to the sheltered employment, and the sheltered employment is paying them minimum wage, more of filling in a person's time versus anything else, and we're not paying for that service. We do see a number of individuals that they're working in the community, but they are coming back to the sheltered employment part-time. Okay, rule number 2, youth with disabilities cannot begin sub-minimum wage employment until certain requirements are met. And that is, now we need to look at when did they start working sub-minimum wage? And was it prior to July 22nd or was it after? So if they were not a student with disability and it's prior to July 22nd, really they don't need to be referred to us. They would not need a pre-employment transition service documentation. And of course, the person would not need to be referred to VR. We're seeing most of these individuals have gone through VR at one point in time. But there are some of these individuals that are 23 years old that they were working sub-minimum wage prior to July 22nd. And we're just doing the periodic reviews. And during that process, we're giving them information about VR. Hold on here. Darn thing on our way. Okay. Youth with disabilities, when they start working, when they start after July 22nd. Now, those individuals have to be referred to VR. And it's important that when they get referred to VR, that we find the individual, if they're eligible and develops a plan for employment, we work toward achieving competitive integrated employment. And it says reasonable period of time is a really vague definition in the regulations. And I think you're going to have to show some effort that you're trying some work experiences, situational assessments, or until the VR case is closed. When you read the regulations on this, it's almost negative. It's reversed way around where it says the individuals found ineligible. And if the agencies think they're going to refer someone to you and then you just make them ineligible so they can do some minimum wage, you really need to go through the whole process and give the individual the full opportunity for community employment. Because if you make the person ineligible, then we're going to do also annual reviews, and you're going to show that there was substantial reasoning that you offered that community employment. So, and the other thing that came out is, let's say that an individual is referred to the VR office today, and this person was a youth and should have been referred to them, and they want to start this person on some minimum wage employment now. They legally can't. They're going to have to wait for us to go through this process. So the person, if they do start sub-minimum wage, the agency may have to go back, and I'm saying the agency, the employer, the community support provider may have to go back and pay them minimum wage. So Yankton's asking, so the VR case has to be closed, or they can't have an open and have the pre. This is for the question here. I would say that, if the person is still an open case and you have services going and you're trying to achieve community employment, I don't think that you can start the sub-minimum wage employment until that VR case is closed. So it doesn't mean that once they're referred to VR, they can start sub-minimum wage. We have to be able to show that we are trying to achieve that competitive integrated employment. Rule number 3, people with disabilities working in sub-minimum wage have periodic reviews. Again, we need to focus on that July 22nd date. If they're working prior to that and they're not a student with disability, their first annual review must be done by July 22nd, 2017. So basically, we had a full year. When the federal act came out, we thought we'd have to do all these individuals within 6 months and then 6 months again. And there's about 1,000 individuals out there. And so many of these individuals work in sub-minimum wage employment for a long period of time. We just had to do one review onto them. But if they started working sub-minimum wage on or after July 22nd, then we must do their first review within 6 months. And then again, it's repeated 6 months later, and then it goes annually. And where some of the confusion happens here is these community support providers thinking, well, if we went from one job site to the next, that's starting new. No, they are still the employer the whole time. Just because the job changes, the work changes in their environment, they're still sub-minimum wage. They were employee of that agency the whole time. One of the biggest challenges that the community support providers are having is realizing that they are the employer. They have to respect the employment laws, and they need to follow the employment laws. And they're getting this confused with being service provider and being employer. And they need to follow the Fair Wage and Standards Act on these individuals. It's a paradigm shift for many of those individuals. And, it's always kind of a struggle when they are delivering the service. They're the case manager, plus they're also the employer onto there. And that's caused us problems sometimes in the past where they develop the contract where they are the employer, but also the service provider. And we had times and situations where they have discontinued that employment without coming back and talking to VR, or where they have not represented that individual as they would on any other job situation to try to salvage that job. So when you're wearing both hats, it does cause problems.
Bernie, this is Laura. Can you hear me?
No, I can't, Laura.
I'm chiming in late as usual. We were trying to hear what you said in regards to the situation. If we are working with a student who is in high school, we are working on community-based employment like project skills. Is it or is it not okay for them to go work in a contract that we have nothing to do with?
Is this a student?
If it helps fill that day or what have you.
Is this a student?
Yes.
They have to be paid minimum wage. They can go.
So if they're paid minimum wage, they can still work in that, right? Okay.
Yeah, they have to be paid minimum wage. Okay. Now, it does get a little confusing. I know if you're in Aberdeen that they have the federal contract. And, they're paid, let's say they're paid I've paid $9 an hour, which is over minimum wage, but they're on the federal contract, or they're not paid prevailing wage rate. I'd have to look at that. We could not close that person a successful employment that way, but they probably may be able to work there. because the Section 511 refers to minimum wage, not prevailing wage. Okay. Also, while we're talking about the Ability One contracts, I do want to clarify, we did get one clarification from Rehabilitation Service Administration recently, and I'm going to use an example where the person is paid a percent of the $14 an hour, and let's say they're getting $7 an hour as a base wage. But when they're working on these federal contracts, they have to pay they have to offer health and welfare benefits to everyone, and because they're on a federal contract. And since many of these individuals have SSI or SSDI, they're just paying them an hourly rate in addition to that instead of providing the medical benefits. And so they start adding this health and welfare benefits, which is like $4.50 an hour, to the $7 an hour, and say, okay, this person is above minimum wage, doesn't need some periodic reviews. And Section 511 specifically is on that base pay. So we had to go back to Huron, for example, who said they didn't have anyone on the sub-minimum wage or 511. We do have some individuals now that are going to have to be reviewed. I sent this information to Wahi Inc. I have not heard anything back, but unless they're paying these individuals the $14 an hour, they won't need the review. But if they're paying them less, they're going to need reviews. So a little bit about the status reviews, where we're at. You're probably familiar that we did contract out with 3 individuals who have extensive experience in the past with voc rehab, but also understand VR services and understand the services that are happening out there. And many of the agencies have already had reviews completed or at least started. What we did in early July, that these agencies were to complete a data spreadsheet for me and send it in, and then I would populate this form to give to the reviewers. That way, when the reviewers are meeting with the individuals, that they're not going through the list, okay, what's your address, what's your phone number, what's your social security, and many of these individuals may not even know that we already have that information. And reviewers need to meet with the individuals and offer some career counseling, offer some information referral services to them. And so that's kind of where they're at in status. They're meeting with them one-on-one, going down the list. Building services have been done. Advance is mostly completed. There was like 75 people there, 52 reviews were done, 4 referrals to VR. Going down the list, Aspire has been done, but we did have a few new individuals that are needing some reviews, and a few of them were that 6 months one. So I did ask the Aberdeen staff to do the periodic review for 3 or 4 of them. One was already a VR case, and then in April the reviewer will come back and do the second review on there. So we are at a point now looking at who came on new to sub-minimum wage after July 22nd, and also have to make sure they get their second reviews done. Black Hills Special Service 2 locations were done. Black Hills Works. I talked to Margie here this last week, and I believe she has them all done now, and it ended up being almost up to 200 individuals. Community Connections has no sub-minimum wage. Dakota Milestones in Chamberlain is done. Dakota Abilities in Sioux Falls, this is, I think it's done. They initially had 59 people, but what happened is they were reporting people, everyone in their day program. They only need to report people who are doing sub-minimum wage. Human Service Agency is over half done. Huron, who said they had no sub-minimum wage, now does have some. Life Quest is half completed. Lifescape, Jim is a little further than just 35 of them. I get their review forms when the month is over. So since February has a few more days in here, I won't receive their review forms until a week or two. So Live, we just got the data from them last week, so they had like 10 people. Northern Hills is done. Y Inc. says they have no sub-minimum wage. I don't know about that. SESDAC, they said they don't. I know they don't. And I'm sorry, it wasn't SESDAC. That is South Dakota Developmental Center. And Southeastern Directions for Life, they're done. Valiant Living, which is the old Echo, they're done. I have not received the data for Volunteers in Dakotas. And we did a few private employers that we did those reviews. And typically there was a community support provider that was connected with them and talked them into doing this 14C form certificate every year. And, you know, I just kind of question, I wish they would have done that. Some of the individuals I reviewed out there, you know, I think they could have been just as easy paid the minimum wage, or they're really close to it. Why are they messing around with this documentation? So the referrals to VR varied between agencies. We got some that are as high as 25%, some as low as 0%. So it varied between the agencies. We have a few things we noticed on the reviews is approximately 70% of individuals had guardian. We are having this discussion right now at our state level on guardianship, that it has to be brought up and discussed when individuals are, when their students are turning 18. It doesn't mean that there has to be a guardian. And we've got situations where sometimes there shouldn't be a guardian. And, you know, so I think every office has run into that where they can't get a hold of the guardian, or the guardian's incarcerated, or the kids were taken away from the guardian. I mean, just all kinds of stories out there. So I received a few calls from guardians. I developed a memo, a letter that those community support fighters are to give to the guardians or family, and which seemed to have helped. Some of these agencies are much better about informing the guardians than others. There's been a couple wage and hour issues in two situations, and they involve both the same community support provider. One was where they were working with a motel, doing a enclave with the motel, and the motel was paying these individuals directly, but the motel was paying these individuals less than minimum wage. And I contacted Department of Labor onto there, and they informed me they got it clarified, taken care of. So found a couple students that are still doing sub-minimum wage. And what we're seeing also is sometimes reviewers are needing to go out to the job sites for some of the reviews. There's some sub-minimum wage review. Some sub-minimum wage employment is not always at the day program. Those are sometimes on enclaves or other mobile work crew situations. So 13 people we're seeing that we're going to start doing their second review. Also, I mentioned that counselors, I'm asking to do a couple of these reviews that are new people starting up, and especially if they have an open case with VR. Referrals to VR, so far we had 66. This is about 10% of the reviews. I'm asking, and when we get these referrals, I am scanning the review document to the supervisor and send that to them at these referrals. And what I want done is, if the person is where you will contact the individual guardian first by trying to get hold of my phone, and if not, then also sending them a letter, and document that in the VR Faces. If there is a previous case, document that in a case note. If there's not a previous case, then do a phone book entry into there. I am tracking the status of referrals, what happens to them. You know, we're just seeing sometimes where guardians don't want their son or daughter to work in the community for safety reasons or whatever. So, okay, this is the end of the presentation. I do want to mention, before I open this up to questions, one of the things that you probably realize we didn't do a sign-up sheet. And since we're doing this by webinars now, that we still need some way to verify people's attendance. And we are now doing that through SurveyMonkey. But I need to know for sure that people listen to the presentation. And so we're doing this with all our webinars. And what I'm doing is, I don't know if you guys realize this, but I'm a fan of The Walking Dead show. And the way they get you to watch commercials is they give you 2 codes during the commercials of Walking Dead. And then when the show is over, you can go out to the website and you can now register. And if you enter those 2 codes, you can be a guest zombie on The Walking Dead. So I can't offer you any being a guest zombie, but if you enter the 2 codes, and the code is WIOA review. That is the code. And so when you do the survey, that is what you need to put in. And people who have it in there will get the CRC. Someone asked a question. When the counselor completes evaluation on competitive integrated employment, who will review it? It'll just be part of the case file, Katie. And I think it's going to be more for your assurance that this questionable job site is meeting that requirement. Someone asked, can you say the code again? It's WIOA review. WIOA is the first word. Review is the second. And also, I'll give people like a week to get these entered in, because we will pull down the data probably a week later. We're in the process of submitting for the CRC code that we have to send, and we'll need to get that first where we can issue the CRC. If someone is on here that needs it for the CESP, I can also issue that on there too. But you need to do the survey. So this time, is there questions on the section 511 or questions on any other of the topics I did have? Anyone? Nathan, usually you have a bunch of questions.
Bernie, this is Jennifer in Yankton.
Yep.
Okay, so just clarifying, because we've had a lot of questions from a CSP, and I guess I was incorrect. A youth, so in between the ages of 24 and 21, not receiving school funding, cannot receive sub-minimum wage unless their VR case is closed and they have the pre-employment transition skills, correct?
Were they doing sub-minimum wage before July 22nd?
No.
So if they didn't, if they were not doing sub-minimum wage before July 22nd, their case really should be closed. That we have fully shown that we could offer that community integrated employment.
See, they're still working with us. So we are still working towards community integrated employment, but since they're no longer a student and they've had the pre-employment transition skills, the community support provider is wanting them to come in and do sub-minimum wage while we're still looking for competitive employment.
Hold on, Ross. I'm going to get to that one screen. That is the when they come to VR, individuals found eligible and develops a plan for employment, works toward achieving competitive integrated employment for a reasonable period of time. VR case is closed. And I'll have to double check on the regulations on that, but I'm almost positive that the case has to be closed. Otherwise, hold on once.
Oh,
I may have to look at it and get back to everyone on it for clarification, but in the regulations it says they're made ineligible. And like I said, I just don't know how you can make a person ineligible without giving it opportunity. Hold on here.
and we're just clarifying that's for youth. If it's 24 or 25 and older, we don't have to go through all that.
Yeah,
You know, if
if
they're
they're 25,
reviewed and they
yeah.
come into VR services,
Yeah, if they're
we
25
just
and older.
proceed as normal.
Yeah, once they're over 25, you can proceed as normal on to there. But I'm just trying to see if I can find it here quick. Okay, I'm in the wrong section here. Is that the problem? Yeah, unless I can find it here quick. It's my understanding they're closed, but I'll. Okay. Yeah, I'm just not finding it real quick. I'll send that out to the supervisors to forward it out, and I'll just copy the section of the regulation there. Other questions? Okay. Okay, here's where I found it. Application for VR services. Individual is determined ineligible for VR services or determined eligible for VR services in accordance with the regulations. The youth with disability has approved plan. The youth with disability was unable to achieve the employment outcome for a specific individualized plan despite working towards employment outcome, including supportive employment services for a period of time, and the youth with disabilities case record, which meets all requirements, is closed. So if they got an open case with us, they really can't be doing sub-minimum wage if they started sub-minimum wage employment after July 22nd. Because really, what's stopping them then from referring an individual to you one day and just assuming just because referral's been made, they can start doing sub-minimum wage employment? Now I'll copy this section.
Well,
I'll copy this. Go ahead.
The provider understood that the pre-employment transition skills needed to be completed first. But they thought once that's been done, then because they're no longer a student, then we could have them do both, work with VR for community employment and also work sub-minimum wage in the workshop. And according to this, that is not correct.
Yeah. Getting the pre-employment transition
Okay,
service is one of the things. But I'll copy this whole section out. It gets a little confusing sometimes in the Act and regulations because it uses a lot of ands and ors. And so I'll just double check this. Reread through this again because there is ands and ors sometimes. It really makes it confusing. I may have Gay and Eric even look at it too, see how they interpret it. Other questions? Okay.
I have one question.
Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, it's Vicki.
This is Vicki?
Yeah, yeah. I wrote it out as well. We opened up several cases where the students.
Okay, Vicki, I'm not hearing you very well. It's real echoing. There's something going on.
Can you read my question?
You have a question that's typed up here. It says we have a few cases open with students at Lifescape, and they are doing the pre-employment transition pre-ETS services. They are doing volunteer jobs in the community. Can we close a case unsuccessfully without funding a situational assessment or project skills? Well, yeah, you can, because the work-based experience could be a volunteer arrangement. I mean,
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
yeah, I would say that when we have a VR student, have a student and we made them a VR case and we do project skills with them, I can comfortably say that they have at least had 4 of the 5 pre-ETS. I would probably say someone who goes through one of these 18 to 21 programs and Project Search, they're probably getting all 5 of them through there. But yeah, you can close the case without funding a situational assessment or doing project skills, as long as they're doing some of the other areas into there.
That sounds good.
Okay. Other questions? Can we close it too severely disabled? You can close a person too severely disabled from application to eligibility, but they got to go through your standard evaluation or your trial work status. I'm not sure which it's considered nowadays with the new requirements. And then you have to prove within a reasonable doubt that they are too severely disabled. And then we have to do annual reviews from there. Now you can close the case. I think the question is going to come into where you can close the case uncooperative and all that stuff, but then the student would have to show where they receive the pre-employment transition services before they do some minimum wage. Or I should say youth. Other questions? Again, I'll be, the session was recorded. It'll take a little while just to convert it, but I should be able to get it posted out there by tomorrow for sure. Yankton's got a question. We will most likely have the student eligible. How would we close the file if we don't feel they could do? How could we close the file if we don't feel they could do competitive employment? Well, you're going to need to try to do situational assessments, or you're going to need to try to do some community employment situations. And, if the person doesn't cooperate or follow through, you can close. It's going to be unsuccessful, of course, but it's going to be a tough closure if the guardian refuses the closure and continues to insist to keep it open. But that will just have to be better documentation to where the person's not meeting the performance expectations. But I would say situational assessments, try that, try other, whether it's employment skills or whatever, to try to at least tempt some community-based employment. Minutes left. Other questions? Otherwise, we're going to discontinue. I will send out this language from the regulations to Gay and Eric and Rhonda and the supervisors and just see exactly how they interpret this. But like I said, I'm kind of interpreting that we cannot do, the youth cannot work sub-minimum wage while it's still an open case with ER. Now kind of look back at a couple of the PowerPoints from Rehabilitation Service Administration, see if that's how they interpret it also. Okay, well, if no other questions, that does conclude the presentation today. It did go pretty close to 2 hours. So I'm going to disconnect and hang up, and you guys have a good week.